So now in this lecture we are going to discuss the de Broglie wavelength of a particle in terms of kinetic energy of the particle. So let us consider that there is a particle of mass m and it is in motion with velocity v. Then its momentum p will be equal to mv, and the de Broglie wavelength of the matter waves associated with it is given by lambda is equal to h upon p or h upon mv. Now the kinetic energy of the particle is given by an equation of the type that is E is equal to half mv square. So this kinetic energy can be written as E is equal to half mv square, but I can rearrange this equation in such a way that I write this equation as E is equal to 1 upon twice m square v square. So if I multiply this equation by m and again divide this equation by m, then it will have the form, if I multiply this equation by m and divide it again by m, then it is not going to alter the equation, but it will definitely change the form of the equation such that this E will become equal to this m into m, that is m square v square upon this twice m. So this equation becomes E is equal to, now what is m into v? M into v is the momentum, so mass into velocity is momentum, and therefore this m square v square becomes momentum square. So this E will become equal to p square upon twice m. Now I can rearrange this equation in terms of p square. So this p square will become equal to twice me. So this p will be equal to square root of twice me, and according to de Broglie's hypothesis, we know that lambda is equal to h upon p, and therefore we can have the equation which is lambda is equal to h upon p, which is equal to h upon, now here I put the value of this p as square root of twice me. So now if you look at this equation, which is lambda is equal to h upon square root of twice me, now what are the terms which are involved in this equation? This h is the Planck's constant, it is 6.63 into 10 raised to power minus 34 joules. M is mass of the particle, it is constant, and this capital E is the kinetic energy of the particle. So this h is Planck's constant, which is known to you. Knowing the mass of the particle and its kinetic energy, you can be able to calculate what is the de Broglie wavelength associated with the particle. So this above equation, it gives the de Broglie wavelength of a particle of mass m and kinetic energy E. So this equation is true for any particle which is irrespective of its charge and mass. So whatever be the particle, irrespective of its charge and mass, it means that we can calculate the de Broglie wavelength associated with electron, which is a negatively charged particle. We can be able to calculate the de Broglie wavelength associated with a proton, which is a positively charged particle. We can be able to calculate the de Broglie wavelength associated with a neutron, which is also a neutral particle. So we can be able to calculate the de Broglie wavelength associated with any kind of a particle which is irrespective of its charge and mass by using this equation. Is it clear?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
So this formula is important. You have to remember this formula. So this is the de Broglie wavelength of a particle, which we can write in terms of kinetic energy of the particle. Then next is the de Broglie wavelength of an electron or a proton which is accelerated by a potential difference. So you can imagine that there are two, suppose, metal plates, and to these two metal plates we connect a very high potential difference. Then the metal plate which is subjected to negative potential, it will reject or eject out the electrons. So electrons will be ejected out from the metal plate which is connected to the negative potential, and such electrons will reach up to the other plate which is connected to the positive potential, and the current will flow in the circuit. So these electrons, which are the surface electrons, they will achieve the necessary kinetic energy, because when this electron is accelerated from this, suppose these are the two plates A and B, so the electron is accelerated from plate B towards this plate A due to the application of this potential difference. Means here we are providing the electrical energy, and this electrical energy is converted into the kinetic energy, this electrical energy will provide the necessary kinetic energy for the motion of electron from plate B towards plate A. So this electrical energy is necessary in conversion of or in giving kinetic energy to the motion of electron from plate B towards plate A. So if V is the potential or V is the voltage which is applied to this battery, or you may call it V as the potential to which this electron is subjected, then if a charged particle such as electron or a proton, forget about this proton for one instant of time, just consider the case of electron and then we can extend this concept to proton also. So if there is a charged particle such as suppose electron of rest mass m0 and it is accelerated by a potential difference of capital V volts, then the kinetic energy gained by it is given by kinetic energy will be equal to small e multiplied by the capital V, where this small e is the charge on the electron and capital V is the potential to which it is subjected. So E into V is nothing but it is the necessary this E into V is the electrical energy which provides necessary kinetic energy for the motion of electron. So kinetic energy of electron can be written as half m0 into V square, where this m0 is the rest mass of the electron and it should be equal to EV. So again we can write this half m0 V square as m0 square V square upon twice m0, which is equal to EV, and therefore I can write this as m0 square V square is equal to, transferring this twice m0 on right hand side, it becomes twice m0 EV. So this m0 V will be equal to square root of twice m0 EV. Now you know that this m0 V is nothing but it is the momentum associated with the electron, and therefore according to de Broglie's hypothesis, since the wavelength associated with the charged particle is given by lambda is equal to h upon p, so it will be h upon m0 into V. So from equation 2 and 3, let us substitute here value of m0 V, and the value of m0 V is square root of twice m0 EV. So from equation 2 and 3 we get the final equation as lambda is equal to h upon the value of this m0 V, which is p, is square root of twice m0 EV. Now here if you look at this equation is very important. Now if you look at this equation, what is h? H is just a Planck's constant, and you know the value of this h, it is 6.63 into 10 raised to power minus 34 joule second. Here this E is charge of the electron, which is 1.6 into 10 raised to power minus 19 coulomb, and m0 is the rest mass of the electron. So for the rest mass of electron, this m0 will be equal to 9.1 into 10 raised to power minus 31 kg. So if I substitute the values of h, m0 and E by keeping V as it is in this equation, because this h is constant, m0 is constant, E is constant, this 2 is constant. So if I compute the values, if I compute the value of h upon square root of twice m0 E and keep this square root of V as it is, then I will get the value of this lambda as 12.26 angstrom minute divided by root of V. This is very important formula. Angstrom minute is 10 raised to power minus 10 meter. So this equation directly gives us the de Broglie wavelength associated with electron in particular. Why electron in particular? Because here we are substituting the value of m0. Here we are substituting the value of m0, where m0 is the rest mass of electron. So if I substitute here value of m0 as the mass of electron, which is 9.1 into 10 raised to power minus 31 kg, then this value comes out to be 12.26 divided by root of V in angstrom minute. So this is the de Broglie wavelength associated with electron. So if I give you a problem like if an electron is subjected to a potential difference of 100 volts, what is the de Broglie wavelength associated with this electron?
12.26.
If I say that electron is subjected to potential difference of 100 volts, What is the de Broglie wavelength? Calculate the de Broglie wavelength associated with the electron. So what is the de Broglie wavelength associated with the electron?
1.2.
It is 1.2.
1.226.
It is 1.226 angstrom minute. It is very simple. So since you can compute it in a fraction of seconds, and therefore such type of problems can be asked in multiple choice questions, MCQ type questions.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so this formula is important. Then instead of the mass of electron, if I keep here the value of m0 as the rest mass of proton, which is 1.673 into 10 raised to power minus 27 kg in this equation 4, then I will get the formula for de Broglie wavelength lambda, while I will keep here the value of h as 6.63 into 10 raised to power minus 34 joule, this 2, then charge of the electron as 1.6 into 10 raised to power minus 19 coulomb, charge of proton is also same, but it is just opposite in sign. The value magnitude of the charge is same for electron and proton, so it is 1.6 into 10 raised to power minus 19 coulomb, but instead of mass of electron, if I put here the mass of proton, which is 1.673 into 10 raised to minus 27 kg, and if I compute the value for de Broglie wavelength for proton, if I put here for proton I put the suffix p, so de Broglie wavelength for proton becomes 0.286 angstrom minute divided by root of v. So again, if I give you the problem that if there is a proton which is subjected to a potential difference of 100 volts, calculate the de Broglie wavelength associated with the proton, then what will be that de Broglie wavelength associated with the proton?
0.00028
It will be
angstrom minute.
0.0286 angstrom minute. Angstrom minute means 10 raised to power minus 10 meter. So it is equal to 0.0286 into 10 raised to power minus 10 meter, or this is 1.226 into 10 raised to power minus 10 meter. Is it clear?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
So these two formulas are important. These two formulas are important. Okay. Now, why? Now the question is, why we do not see the presence of matter waves in our daily life, and why it is more apparent in case of microscopic particles such as electrons, protons, and neutrons and so on. So why it is apparent in case of microscopic particles while it is not observed in our daily practice? That is, if you throw a ball, it do not behave like a wave. If you throw a tennis ball,
Yes, sir.
it do not behave like a wave. If you are traveling in a car, you do not feel like a wave. You do not experience like a wave. You feel nothing like wobbling or nothing like a wave nature associated with you. And what is the reason for it? In order to understand this, we take this problem that find the de Broglie wavelength of an electron which is accelerated by a potential difference of 182 volts, and 1 kg object which is moving with a speed of 1 meter per second. Comparing the results, explain why the wave nature of matter is not more apparent in our daily observation. Now, in order to do that, first we will calculate the de Broglie wavelength associated with an electron, and the formula for calculating the de Broglie wavelength associated with electron which is subjected to a potential difference of V volts. V volts is given, it is 182 volts, and the formula is 12.26 angstrom minute, 12.26 angstrom minute divided by root of V. So it is square root of 182. What is the answer? What this wavelength comes out to be? How much is the wavelength in angstrom minute?
0.9.
0.9088.
0.90.
0.9088.
0.9088.
Yes, sir.
0.9088. So I can say that this is roughly 1 angstrom minute, isn't it?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So it is roughly of the order of 1 angstrom minute. Now let us calculate the de Broglie wavelength associated with 1 kg object which is moving with a speed of 1 meter per second. So here, in order to calculate the de Broglie wavelength for an object whose mass is given as 1 kg and whose speed is given as 1 meter per second. So I know here mass and velocity. So I need to use the formula for de Broglie wavelength as lambda is equal to h upon mv. H upon mv, where you know the value of h. The value of h should the value of h is 6.63 into 10 raised to power minus 34 divided by mass of the particle, which is 1 kg, multiplied by velocity of this particle, which is 1 meter per second, and therefore this de Broglie wavelength, it comes out to be 6.63 into 10 raised to power minus 34 meters, while this 1 angstrom minute is of the order of 1 into 10 raised to power minus 10 meter. Now just compare these wavelengths, compare these two wavelengths. Which wavelength is less and which wavelength is higher than the other?
First one is greater than second one.
First one is greater than second one. Here the de Broglie wavelength which is associated with electron is of the order of 1 angstrom minute. 1 angstrom minute is still a very low wavelength, and it is the wavelength which is corresponding to that of X-rays. The wavelength of X-rays are in the range of 1 angstrom minute. The wavelength of X-rays are of the order of 1 angstrom minute, and the wavelength of electron, it also comes in the range of wavelength of X-rays. So since X-rays can be detected, there is a possibility that we can detect the presence of matter wave associated with electron. We can, if there is an electron which is in motion with some velocity v, then there is a matter wave which is associated with the motion of electron, and we can detect the presence of such matter wave which is associated with the electron, since the wavelength corresponding to it is of the order of wavelength of X-rays. Since X-rays can be detected, we can detect the presence of matter wave associated with electron. But what about this wavelength? This wavelength is having a order of 10 raised to power minus 34 meter. Can you detect such a small wavelength?
No, sir.
The wavelength of X-rays is very small, so it becomes very difficult to detect the presence of such small wavelength. If the wavelength is of the order of 10 raised to power minus 34 meters, can you detect such a small wavelength?
No, sir.
No.
No, sir.
No, sir.
It means that a particle or an object which is of the order of 1 kg and moving with a speed of 1 meter per second, such particle will not show the effect of the matter wave. Yes, do the matter waves exist for such particle? Yes, they exist, but the wavelength of such waves is so small that they cannot be detected. That is the problem, and therefore the matter waves or the wave nature of matter is not apparent in our daily observations, and therefore this phenomena is not applicable to macroscopic objects. Macroscopic means MACRO, macroscopic. Macroscopic objects means objects on larger scale or bodies on larger scale. While this phenomena will appear for microscopic objects or microscopic particles. So it applies to the microscopic particles such as electrons, protons, neutrons, and so on. So this phenomena applies to the microscopic particles only, because we know that this de Broglie wavelength lambda is equal to h upon mv. So it is inversely proportional to the mass of the particle. So lighter the particle, greater will be the de Broglie wavelength associated with it, while heavier the particle, if the mass of particle is large, then the de Broglie wavelength associated with the particle is very small. And this is what it happens in case of bodies on macroscopic levels. So an object which is 1 kg in mass and moving with a velocity which is 1 meter per second, the mass of this particle is so large that the de Broglie wavelength associated with it is very small, so that it cannot be detected, while the particle such as electron is a very tiny particle, and you know that the mass of electron is so small that it is just 9.1 into 10 raised to power minus 31 kg, and therefore mass of the particle being very small, there is some measurable amount of this de Broglie wavelength associated with the electron. So the matter waves are detectable for microscopic particles and not for the macroscopic particles or macroscopic objects. Is it clear from this problem?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Then properties of the matter waves. So according to de Broglie's hypothesis, for a particle of mass m which is moving with velocity v, the wavelength of the matter wave associated with it is given by lambda is equal to h upon p or h upon mv, where this h is just a Planck's constant. So we can summarize the properties of these matter waves as the wavelength is inversely proportional to the velocity of the particle. So here the de Broglie wavelength lambda is inversely proportional to the velocity of the particle. Thus, when the particle is at rest, its velocity is 0, and this de Broglie wavelength will tends to infinity. So if this velocity is 0, it means that if the particle is in a state of rest, then since this velocity is inversely proportional to the de Broglie wavelength, the de Broglie wavelength tends to infinity, because 1 upon 0 becomes infinity. While the smaller the value of this velocity, the longer will be the wavelength of the matter waves associated with it. So it means that the matter waves are detectable only for the moving particles. So if I consider here the two extreme cases, that the particle is in a state of rest, so that this velocity of the particle is 0, then in that case de Broglie wavelength becomes infinite. While if I consider that the velocity of the particle is infinite, if the velocity is infinite, then what is the value of de Broglie wavelength?
0.
The de Broglie wavelength will
Zero.
tends to 0.
0.
So when velocity of the particle is 0, the de Broglie wavelength becomes infinite, while when the velocity of the particle is infinite, the de Broglie wavelength is 0. There is no question of infinite velocity. There is no such material particle which can ever attain the velocity of light even. The velocity of light is 3 into 10 raised to power 8 meter per second. There is no material particle which exists in the universe which travels with a speed greater than velocity of light. So there is no question of infinite wavelength. It means that the de Broglie wavelength associated with the particle can never be 0. This is one thing when the particle is in motion. Then the other thing is, if the velocity of the particle is 0, means if the particle is in a state of rest, de Broglie wavelength becomes infinite, and again infinite wavelength is meaningless, because wavelength is the distance between two successive crest and trough. If the distance is infinite, it is meaningless. You cannot measure that wavelength. and therefore the de Broglie wavelength is not associated with the particle in a state of rest. There is no question of infinite wavelength. It means that the matter waves are detectable only for the moving particles. Is it clear? Is this first point clear?
Yes,
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
So de Broglie wavelength are not associated with the particle which is in the state of rest, because if the particle is in a state of rest, de Broglie wavelength becomes infinite, which is meaningless. So de Broglie wavelengths are associated with the particle in motion only, or moving particles, and the velocity of such moving particles also it cannot be infinity, otherwise de Broglie wavelength becomes 0. Then the de Broglie wavelength is inversely proportional to the mass of the particle, which we have right now seen that since lambda is inversely proportional to mass, so heavier the particle, less will be the de Broglie wavelength, lighter the particle, greater will be the de Broglie wavelength. And therefore for microparticles, the wave behavior of microparticle is significant, whereas the waves which are associated with macro bodies can never be detected. Right now we have seen that with the example. Then matter waves are related with probability of finding the particle. So if a photon is considered as a particle, then corresponding electromagnetic wave is de Broglie wave for that photon. Similarly, atomic particles are associated with the matter waves, which do not have similarity to any known waves such as electromagnetic or sound waves. So de Broglie waves are associated with locating the probability of a particle, and hence they are also known as probability waves. So we'll discuss this in much detail, what is meant by probability wave, but they are just the probability waves. Then these matter waves, they are not electromagnetic waves. So these matter waves are associated with the particle in motion such as electron. De Broglie waves are associated with the particles such as proton. De Broglie waves are associated with the particles such as neutron, and so on. So if you look at the charges of these particles, then this electron is a negatively charged particle, proton is a positively charged particle, and neutron is a neutral particle. So in all the cases de Broglie waves exist. It means that de Broglie waves are independent of charge of the particle. Isn't it?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
So it is associated with negatively charged particle, it is associated with positively charged particle, it is associated with a neutral particle also. It means that it is independent of charge. So since the de Broglie waves are independent of charge, and therefore they are not affected by presence of any electric field or magnetic field. They are not affected by a presence of any electric field or magnetic field means if there is a charged particle which is performing its motion through a electric field or a magnetic field, then the motion of charged particle is affected by the presence of this this electric field. If there exists an electric field, this plate is positive, this plate is negative, then this electron is accelerated towards the positive charged plate. Or if there is a magnetic field, then this electron is also deflected due to the presence of magnetic field. But since the matter waves, they are not electromagnetic in nature, you know that whenever there is a charged particle which is in motion, there is an electromagnetic, it generates the electromagnetic wave. So the matter waves are not electromagnetic in nature, and therefore they are not deflected or they are not affected by the presence of the electric and magnetic field. Then the matter waves are not mechanical waves. So mechanical waves such as sound waves are produced by the vibration of the particles of the medium through which they travel. A particle can always travel in vacuum, and hence the matter waves are associated with it in vacuum also. As matter waves do not require any medium for propagation, so they are not mechanical waves. So you know that for propagation of mechanical waves, there is a basic requirement that there should be a material medium which is necessary for the propagation of waves, such as sound waves. I already told you that they are the mechanical waves because they are produced by the vibrations of the vocal cord, or if the sound waves are produced by any kind of a string, such as a string instrument such as guitar or sitar or violin, then the vibrations in the string, which are the mechanical vibrations, they produce the sound waves. So for propagation of sound they require the material medium, while here for the propagation of these matter waves they do not require any material medium, and therefore they are not the mechanical waves. So these are the properties which are associated with the matter waves. Is it clear to everyone, or is there any doubt
Yes, sir.
regarding any property? So
No, sir.
these are the 5 properties. That is, de Broglie wavelength is inversely proportional to the velocity of the particle. De Broglie wavelength is inversely proportional to the mass of the particle. Then matter waves are related with the probability of finding the position of particle. Then matter waves are not electromagnetic in nature. The matter waves are not mechanical waves. So these are the 5 properties associated with the matter waves. Then we discuss the Bohr's postulate and the de Broglie's hypothesis. So you know that now today we are quite confident about the atomic model. You know that there are various atomic models, and why it is important for us to know what is mean by an atom, because I already mentioned you the fact that our universe is mostly made up of matter and radiation. So for radiation we know that there exists a wave particle duality and all. There are few physical phenomena such as interference, diffraction, polarization, photoelectric effect, Compton effect, blackbody radiation, and so on and so forth. Then light shows the phenomena such as reflection, refraction, rectilinear propagation, and so on. So we know something about radiation, but what about matter? So in order to know what is meant by matter, we should explore what is the smallest particle of this matter is. So the smallest particle of matter is called as atom, and therefore it is necessary for us to know what is meant by an atom, what are its constituents, what is the composition of atom. So if we can understand what is meant by atom, so then we can only understand how the composition of universe takes place, and therefore different theories were put forward by different scientists over a very huge period of time in order to explain what is meant by an atom is. The first atomic model was given by Thomson, and according to Thomson, an atom consists of positively charged particles, or positively charged particles, an array of positively charged particles in which some of the negatively charged particles are put into it like plums. So it is called as a plum pudding model. So there is a pudding of positively charged particles in which the negatively charged particles are there, such as plums. So he proposed that very few negatively charged particles are there, but his model fails to explain many of the properties associated with atom. So his atomic model has been rejected. Then in physics there are 2 kinds of scientists. One is called as an experimental scientist, and the other one is called as a theoretical scientist. So the work of the theoretical scientist is they try to put a theory first in order to explain the physical phenomena which occurs in nature by using some mathematics, while the role of experimental scientist is they perform the experiment first, and they, on the basis of experimental facts, they try to develop a theory. So Rutherford was the experimental scientist, and he performed the experiment of scattering of alpha particles through a thin foil of gold, and which you have studied in 10th 12th standard, the scattering of alpha particles through a thin foil of gold. And he come to the conclusion that since the alpha particles are scattered through a very thin, when they are allowed to pass through a very thin foil of gold, then alpha particles are positively charged particles, and being positively charged particles, if they are scattered while passing through the thin foil of gold, it means that they are deflected. So they are deflected due to some kind of a field, and you know that like charges repel each other. So that some kind of a field is nothing but it is a positively charged field. So he assumed that the atom should consist of a centrally charged central charge which is positive, and he named that center as nucleus. So according to him, this nucleus should possess a positive charge, and the positively charged particle inside this nucleus is the proton, which is responsible for the positive charge, and that is why this alpha particle, while passing through the thin foil of gold, it gets deflected due to the presence of this positive charge on the nucleus. And also he observed that the whole mass of the atom is concentrated inside the nucleus. So his conclusion about the atom is whole mass of the atom is concentrated inside the nucleus. Then this nucleus possesses a positive charge due to the presence of protons, which are positively charged particles. But atom is electrically neutral. Atom is not charged. Like if you touch this atom, it will not produce any kind of a charge. It is neutral. So since the atom is found to be electrically neutral, so he proposed that there is an equivalent negative charge which should surround around the nucleus. So whatever be the amount of protons are there inside the nucleus, the same amount of negatively charged particles called as electrons, they should be revolving around the nucleus. So this was the Rutherford's atomic model, and at that time, again I repeat that there were no beginning of any kind of quantum physics. Only the ideas of classical physics were there, and he was trying to develop a theory with the help of a classical physics, Rutherford also. So his model was quite successful in giving a brief picture of atom, but at the same time he was applying the laws of classical physics to the motion of this electron. And when this electron is revolving around the nucleus, so whenever there is a charged particle which is in motion, according to classical physics, it should radiate energy continuously. So when this electron is in motion around the nucleus, which is a charged particle which is in motion, then it should radiate energy continuously. So if this electron radiates energy continuously, it means that it loses its energy continuously. So after performing some revolutions, this electron should fall inside the nucleus, because it is radiating energy continuously. It means that it is losing its energy, and this electron is negatively charged, proton is positively charged. So after some revolutions, this electron should merge into the nucleus, but this doesn't happen. It means that something is there which is not been able to explain the atomic model, isn't it?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Either Rutherford
Yes,
is
sir.
wrong,
Yes, sir.
either Rutherford is wrong giving this atomic model, or the classical physics is wrong about the motion of charged particle. But classical physics is not wrong, because charged particle do radiate energy continuously. Rutherford is also not wrong, but something is wrong in this model, and in order to search for that what is missing in this model, then came up the Bohr. So Niels Bohr, who was the student of Rutherford, he was also an experimental physicist. So he proposed that forget about putting up the theory for any atomic model first. We try to have some experimental results, and from those experimental results we will try to develop a theory. So what he proposed is that he performed the experiment of he studied the hydrogen atom spectra, and from the hydrogen atom spectra, you know that hydrogen atom is the simplest atomic model which is known to us, because in case of hydrogen there is only one proton inside the nucleus, there is no neutron, and there is only one electron which is revolving around the nucleus. इसमें एक ही प्रोटॉन है, एक ही इलेक्ट्रॉन है. So what Bohr did is he studied the hydrogen atom spectra, and from the hydrogen atom spectra he observed the various transitions in case of hydrogen atom. So according to classical physics, the energy levels are continuous in nature. According to classical physics, the energy levels associated with atom, they are continuous in nature. But on the other hand, from the hydrogen atom spectra, he observed that the energy levels are not continuous in nature, but the energy levels are discrete in nature. So if this is the ground energy state, say E1, while these are the higher energy states such as E2, E3, E4 and so on, associated with the hydrogen atom, then when an electron jumps from one specific energy level to the other specific energy level, then only it can radiate energy. When an electron jumps from energy level E3 to energy level E1, then only it can radiate energy. When an electron jumps from energy level E4 to energy level E1, then only it can radiate energy. And such lines, they are called as H alpha line, H beta line, H gamma line and so on. And further, it has been observed that there are various series such as Balmer series, Paschen series, Pfund series, Lyman series and so on. So these are the various kinds of series for the transition of electron from one specific energy level to the other energy level takes place. And when electron jumps from one particular energy level to the other particular energy level, then only it can radiate energy. Otherwise, the energy levels are not continuous in nature, but they are discrete in nature. This is the experimental observation. And in order to prove this experimental observation, he need to make three assumptions, and these three assumptions were called as postulates. And these three postulates are mentioned over here, that electrons can revolve around the nucleus of an atom only in stationary orbits, or known as permitted orbits. While revolving in these orbits, it cannot radiate any energy. So electrons can revolve around the nucleus in only stationary orbits or permitted orbits, and during their revolution in their stationary orbit or permitted orbit, they cannot radiate any kind of energy. Then second postulate was the angular momentum of the electron is quantized, that is mvr is equal to nh upon 2 pi. And the third postulate or third assumption is when electron jumps from one permitted orbit to the other, then only it can radiate any energy. So these are the three assumptions in order to be made to explain the hydrogen atom spectra completely. And he was successful in explaining the hydrogen atom spectra completely on the basis of these three assumptions, and for that he was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics. And even Bohr fails to explain the next atomic model, which is the deuterium. So hydrogen atom being the simplest atomic model, that with one proton inside the nucleus and one electron revolving around the nucleus, he was able to explain it, but he was not able to explain the next higher, you may call it as a complicated atomic system. If there are more than two electrons, then it is called as a complicated atomic system or complicated atomic model or complex atomic model. So he was not able to explain the 2 electron model, 3 electron model, 4 electron model, or you may call it as a complex electron model. But he was able to explain only the simplest atomic model, which is the hydrogen atom. Now what he did is he made these three assumptions, but these three assumptions were able to explain the theory completely, but they are just the assumptions. They do not have any theoretical background. They are the assumptions or inferences which are obtained from the experimental result. So whenever we obtain something experimentally, it needs a theoretical justification. If we have a theory for any physical phenomena, it must have a experimental proof. So it is vice versa. So otherwise that theory is incomplete. If you have any theoretical idea, you must have an experimental justification for it. if you have experimental evidences, then you must have a theory for it. You should be able to explain it theoretically. You should have a theoretical justification for it. But once this Bohr has given these postulates, no one was successful in giving any theoretical justification for this postulate. But this de Broglie's hypothesis of matter waves, it gives the theoretical justification for this existence of Bohr's postulate for the first time. So according to de Broglie, this electron, when it revolves around the nucleus, this electron being a particle, whenever it is in motion around the nucleus, then there is a matter wave which is associated with this electron, and this matter wave, if it meets itself like this, if it is originated from here, and if it meets itself in phase, so if the matter wave meets itself in phase for the electron, then it produces a stationary orbit. So here such an orbit in which the matter wave meets itself in phase, it produces a stationary wave pattern, and such stationary orbit is called as the stationary orbit. And when electron revolves in case of such stationary orbit, it cannot radiate any energy. So it gives a theoretical justification for the first postulate. Then coming to the second postulate, that the angular momentum of electron is quantized and it is mvr is equal to nh upon 2 pi. There were no theoretical justification for making this assumption. But this de Broglie's hypothesis of matter waves again gives the theoretical justification for the second postulate as like this, that what is the circumference of this circle?
2 pi r. 2 pi r. 2 pi r.
The circumference of the circle is 2 pi r, and if it should fit a stationary wave pattern inside it, it means that we should be able to calculate the exact number of wavelengths which fit into the orbit, isn't it? This is one wavelength which fits exactly into this orbit.
Yes, sir.
This is another wavelength. This is third wavelength. This is fourth wavelength. This is fifth wavelength. This is sixth wavelength, and so on. So if it produces the stationary wave pattern, it should have an integral number of wavelengths which should fit into it, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
So this 2 pi r should be equal to n into lambda. So this 2 pi r should be equal to n multiplied by lambda. What is lambda according to de Broglie's hypothesis?
H by
H upon mv.
It is h upon
H
mv.
by P.
It is h upon mv. So this 2 pi r is equal to nh upon mv. If I rewrite this equation in terms of mvr, where this mvr is the angular momentum, what it is? Mvr, if I take this mv on this side and 2 pi on this side, then this mvr is equal to nh upon 2 pi. What does it mean? What is this? Isn't it the second postulate?
Yes, sir.
So this de Broglie's hypothesis, it gives the theoretical justification for the existence of second postulate, and so is the third postulate, that if there is another electron which is revolving in the other orbit, higher orbit, here also there is a stationary wave pattern which is produced in the higher orbit. So electron, when it revolves in this orbit, it cannot radiate any energy. When electron revolves in this orbit, it cannot radiate any energy. But when electron jumps from a orbit, one stationary orbit to the other stationary orbit, or when it jumps from this orbit to this orbit, then it should release any energy. So when electron jumps from one permitted orbit to the other, then only it can radiate any energy. So these three postulates gets the theoretical justification from de Broglie, that is de Broglie's hypothesis. So this is about the Bohr's postulate and de Broglie's hypothesis. Is this clear?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, then
Yes, sir.
then next is the Davison-Germer experiment. It is not part of your syllabus, but these were the two scientists, Davison and Germer. They proved that the matter waves do really exist in nature, and they have calculated the de Broglie wavelength associated with the electron by experimental evidence, and they match these results with the theoretical value of de Broglie wavelength predicted by de Broglie, because till yet this is just a hypothesis, it is just an assumption. So right now I told you that this is a theoretical hypothesis given by de Broglie. So whenever you give a theory, it needs an experimental evidence or it needs an experimental proof. So here these were the two scientists, that is Davison and Germer. They gives experimental evidence for the existence of matter waves. For that, what they did is, I already told you, we have calculated the de Broglie wavelength associated with an electron which is subjected to potential difference of 100 volts. It is 12.26 angstrom minute divided by, say, suppose root of V, and here if it is 100 volts, then you have calculated it to be of the order of, say, 1.226 angstrom minute, which is roughly, you can say that it is of the order of 1 angstrom minute, which is the wavelength range of X-rays. The wavelength range of X-rays is of the order of 1 angstrom minute. Now, since X-rays can be diffracted through single crystal of a nickel, and therefore Davison and Germer, they propose that we can use the single crystal of nickel in order to diffract the matter waves associated with electron. And here what is the condition for diffraction? Can anybody recall what is the necessary condition for observing the diffraction pattern? How should be the wavelength comparable to which thing? The wavelength of incident light should be comparable to what?
Slit width.
Slit width.
It should be.
Slit width. The wavelength of light should be comparable to the dimension of the diffracting aperture. Now, if the wavelength of X-rays is of the order of 1 angstrom minute, then we should develop a slit width of the order of 1 angstrom minute. Then only we can get the diffraction. Otherwise, the phenomena of diffraction cannot be observed. So, in order to construct a grating, you may call this as a grating, diffraction grating. So, here we consider the single crystal of a nickel in which there is a regular periodic arrangement of atoms. So, through these positions of atoms, we can construct various planes, and these planes are called as Bragg planes. These planes are called as Bragg planes. They are called as Bragg planes. So, we can construct the various planes through the position of these atoms, and the interplanar spacing the interplanar spacing in case of these crystals is of the order of 1 angstrom minute. So here this D is the interplanar spacing and it is of the order of 1 angstrom minute. So since this interplanar spacing is of the order of 1 angstrom minute, which is comparable to the wavelength of X-rays, so that is why such crystals are used to diffract the beam of X-rays. So similarly, they tried using this single crystal of nickel and they incident an electron beam onto it, and they also found that this beam of electron gets scattered or get diffracted through these various planes which are present in the single crystal of nickel. Then I am not going in much details of it, but they have used this relation which I already mentioned, that lambda is equal to 12.26 divided by root of V, 12.26 angstrom minute divided by root of V. So this is a theoretical formula given by de Broglie, and by using this theoretical formula they calculated the de Broglie wavelength associated with the electron, and what they observed is they observed the first order diffraction. They observed the first order diffraction for specific values, such as when the voltage is 54 volt, when the voltage is 54 volts, and the angle of diffraction is 50. So here the angle of diffraction is 50. They observe the order of diffraction as the first order diffraction. So here they calculated the de Broglie wavelength theoretically for the electron, and it comes out to be lambda E is equal to 12.26 angstrom minute, 12.26 angstrom minute divided by root of 54 volt, because they observe the first order diffraction for this accelerating potential. So for 54 volt they observe the first order diffraction, and if you calculate this value, it comes out to be 1.67 angstrom minute. So this is the wavelength which is the theoretical wavelength associated with the electron. Now from X-ray diffraction, now I'm not going in much details of this formula, but they use the Bragg's law for X-ray diffraction, which is 2d sin theta, which is 2d sin theta is equal to n into lambda. So here n is the order of diffraction. So we can write down this formula for first order diffraction as lambda is equal to 2d sin theta, where this d is the interplanar spacing. So they know what is the interplanar spacing in case of nickel, and they calculated this value of theta. So the angle of diffraction is found to be 50 degree. So here this value d, that is interplanar spacing, is 0.092 nanometer and so on. So by substituting all these values, they calculated the value for this de Broglie wavelength. This is the formula for experimental wavelength associated with the electron, and they come to the conclusion that this experimental wavelength associated with the electron is 1.65 angstrom minute. Now just compare these two wavelengths. 1.67 angstrom minute is the wavelength which is predicted theoretically, while this 1.65 angstrom minute is the wavelength which comes out experimentally. Are they in good match with each other or not?
Yes, sir.
So the theoretical value of de Broglie wavelength, which is predicted by de Broglie, and the experimental value of wavelength, which is calculated by these two scientists, Davison and Germer, they are in very good match with each other, and therefore this Davison-Germer experiment, it gives the theoretical it gives the experimental proof for the existence of de Broglie waves. Is it clear?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
These details of this Davison-Germer experiment is not part of your syllabus, but you should know this, that matter waves do really exist in nature, and this is a microscopic phenomena. So they are associated with the electron. We have also seen this, why it is not apparent in our daily life, but it is more apparent in case of microscopic particles such as electrons, because this de Broglie wavelength is inversely proportional to the mass of the particle. So lighter the particle, greater will be the de Broglie wavelength. Heavier the particle, less will be the de Broglie wavelength. So it is more apparent in case of particles such as electrons, protons and neutrons, but it is not apparent in our daily objects. Is this clear?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So I think we should stop here for today. We'll continue with this topic in next lecture.
Sir.
Yeah.